What's up, fish nerds? It's Sunday. Hope you've had a great weekend. I just got home from church. Had our Sunday evening service, so just got home from that. And I told you guys that I wanted to make a video about Bristlenose Plecos, beginning to end, how to keep them, care for them, breed them. And so that's what we're going to do today. So let's get right into it. So, if you don't know, this is a Bristlenose Pleco. These are fry. These are about 1.25 to 1.5 inches long. See if we can get a view. The adults down here. Here's Dad hanging out down here. He's going underneath all this algae. You see Mom's hanging out back there in the back. So the reason these are called Bristlenose Plecos is the males will... I wish I could get a view of him. Oh, here he is peeking out. The males get those bristles on their face. Once they reach sexual maturity, get to about 3 inches long, they'll grow those whiskers or those bristles all over their snout region. And these plecos that I have, these are the Super Red variety. The Bristlenose Pleco, they come in, the standard brown. They come in albino. They come in calico, which is a mix of brown and a lighter brown / orangey color. And these Super Reds were bred from the calicos through selective breeding in Germany. So that's how this color was developed, was through just line breeding in Germany from the calicos for those that had the most orange, until they came up with a line that was totally orange like this. And Bristlenose Plecos, the scientific name is Ancestris, and there's some ambiguity because there's several different species of Ancestris, or several different species within the genus Ancestris. Most typically, I've seen these classified as Ancestris cirrhosis. But I've also seen articles and things saying that they should really be left unclassified for now. I'm not sure. I'm just going to call them Ancestris. I'm just going to call them Bristlenose Plecos. Some people will call them bushy nose plecos instead of bristlenose. Bushy nose catfish. On the internet, you'll see the initials BN or BNP. That's what that's talking about. But as far as keeping these guys, they're fairly easy as long as you give them the basic necessities. They have to have wood in the tank. They have to. Their digestums are such that if they don't have wood to rasp on, they can't properly digest their food. They'll get bloat and they'll die. And I learned this the hard way as just a kid. When I had my first aquariums, I would always want to have a pleco, and I would always buy the common pleco, not even the bristlenose, because I didn't know nothing. I had a 10-gallon tank. I wanted an algae eater, and so I went to PetSmart or whichever pet store was that my parents would take me to, and I would buy a pleco. I didn't even know that they was shortened to pleco. I still called them plecostomus at that point. So I would get myself a plecostomus, and I would put it in the tank, and it would last a few weeks, and then it would die. And I never could figure out why. But then once I started keeping tanks with wood in them, never had any problem again. And that's because the lignin in the wood is essential to their diet. They have to have that in their digestive system. So you've got to have wood in the tank if you're going to have a pleco. And that's with pretty much any species of pleco, but especially with the bristlenose, because the bristlenose is one of the most vegetarian of the plecos. They're one of the most effective of the algae eaters in the pleco family. I say pleco family scientifically. No, there's not a pleco family, but there is a big group of fish that have the common name pleco in it. And of those, the bristlenose are about the most efficient algae eater. They are still omnivorous. They'll eat, catfish pellets and things like that. They'll eat flake food that falls to the bottom. So they will eat meaty foods. If you throw some bloodworms or some blackworms in there, they will eat those, but they are primarily plant-based in their diet. So they want a lot of vegetables, things like, well, if you throw some algae wafers in there, but algae wafers aren't near as much algae as what people think they are. Most of them have a lot of, standard fish food ingredients in them, and it's just in a wafer form, and it's green. It's not just a straight tablet of algae. So you do want to supplement their diet with things like cucumber, zucchini, squash, even like canned carrots, and they love green beans. That's the main staple that I feed these guys is green beans. And I like to get the French cut because the skin, if you just feed whole green beans or just the cut green beans, the skin is thick enough to where it makes it a little more difficult for them. They got to rasp through that before they get to the soft inside. Whereas with the French cut, all that soft inside's already exposed and you just got to dump the green beans in. With the cut green beans, I prefer to, break those open before I feed them. And that can be a little time consuming. So I like to get the French cut green beans. And they love it. And a lot of people recommend feeding peas. But honestly, in my experience, every time I fed peas to these guys, they pretty much let them sit. And yes, I did shell the peas. But even the shelled peas, they didn't really act too interested in them. But green beans do seem to be their favorite, along with cucumber and zucchini. Squash taking somewhat of a second place, carrots taking a third place. But all that kind of stuff is good for them. That's going to be the staple of their diet is vegetable matter. As far as water parameters, these guys are pretty flexible. They can handle temperatures down into the 70s. If you're going to have a tank about 75 to 75. They can handle that. I don't like to keep them in cool water like that. I say cool water because for tropical fish, that's fairly cool water, mid 70s. I like to keep them in the 79 to 81 degree range is where I keep these tanks. And they can handle up to 85 or whatever. If you wanted to keep these with discus, they can handle discus tank parameters. pH, they can go all the way down to 6, maybe lower. I've never tried any lower than 6. But they can handle the softer water, and they can even handle a little bit harder water and a little bit higher pH if you wanted to keep them with some, if you've got live bears that you've got hard water for. I've got live bears. My water is like 7.1, 7.2. And these guys do fine. They can handle, a 7.5, 7.7. They can handle that too if you've got harder water, or if you've got a peaceful or relatively peaceful African cichlid tank. If you got a tank of yellow labs and you want to throw a bristlenose in there, they should be totally fine. And that's another thing about these guys is they are sturdy enough that they can handle, a semi-aggressive fish, as long as you're not putting them in with something that's just going to absolutely beat them to death or try to eat them. They'll be all right. They'll find a hiding spot. They're a catfish. They'll be okay with and they get big enough to handle their own, as long as you don't throw them in with something like a doveye or an umbi, something that's going to eat them. They'll be all right. And they do get about 3.5 to 5.5 inches. There's some reports of 6-inch fish, but I think that's pretty rare. The biggest bristlenose I've ever seen in person is about a 5.5 to 6-inch bristlenose, and he's huge, and he's about 14 years old. But on average, you can expect somewhere in the 4 to 5 range. 4 to 5 inches. So these guys aren't going to be a tank busting fish. They're not going to outgrow your tank. A 10-gallon might be kind of small. I mean, they'll do all right. They won't be cramped for base if there's just one, as long as you don't have too many other fish. But as much as these guys eat and as much as they poop, I don't necessarily recommend putting them in a 10-gallon tank. I would say at least a 20, just so that you have enough water to have wiggle room with your parameters. Because these guys do have big appetites, and fish with big appetites make a lot of poop. And a lot of poop will throw off your water parameters. Ooh. I about fell right into this tank, guys. I started to squat down to look at this tank, and my rear end hit the chair that was sitting behind me, and I about spilled right forward into the tank. But as far as breeding these guys go, they're cave spawners. So what happens, the male will go into one of these caves. He'll claim it as his own. He'll stake it out. He'll clear it out, and he'll start guarding it as his own little place. And while he hangs out in there, he'll wait, until a female's ready. When she's ready to breed, she'll hang out around the mouth of this cave. And then he'll come out, invite her in. She goes into the cave, and then he comes in behind her and he traps her. And he doesn't let her out of the cave until she lays eggs. And then once she lays eggs, he lets her out. He fertilizes the eggs, and he won't let her back in or anything else back in. And then he'll guard the eggs, and he'll fan them with his fins and everything to keep water circulating over them to prevent any mold and things like that. And he'll guard those eggs until they've hatched, and then he'll guard the fry until he can't keep them in the cave anymore. So until the fry are big enough that they can get around dad and escape the cave, which essentially makes them big enough to start fending for themselves, to get out and start finding their own food and escape predators, he'll keep them in the cave. Now, they'll still be pretty small. These guys here, let's see if I can think how old these are. These are about 2 months old. They're getting to be about an inch long down here in this tank. So they do come out pretty small, and on average 40 to 60 fry per batch. So they're very easy to breed. I do have 2 females to 1 male in here. But what I end up doing is I end up pulling either the females or the male, and I'll separate them and have the females in one tank and the male in the other tank for a while to give him a break. Because with 2 females, you can have one ready to breed at one point. He breeds with her. He spends 2 weeks in the cave because it'll take a few days for the eggs to hatch and then a few days for the wigglers to become, free swimming. And then several days before he actually lets them out of the cave. And even after several of them start escaping the cave, in my experience, at least this guy, he doesn't start coming out of the cave until all of them essentially have left the cave and it's just him in there. And then he comes out to eat. So he'll go 2 weeks without eating anything. So if he breeds with one female, spends 2 weeks in the cave, by that time the other female's ready to breed. He breeds with her, he's stuck in the cave for another 2 weeks. And that can stress him out, going that long periods without eating that quickly in succession. So I'll separate them out just to give him a break, give him a chance to eat for a while and fatten back up before I'll put them back together and let them breed again, because they breed very readily. I don't have, and some people will talk about, doing a big water change with cooler water to, mimic the rainy season and things like that. I've never had to do anything like that. And I'm on a drip system, so there's no water changes that I would accidentally you know, mimic a rainy season or anything. It's just they're ready to breed, so they breed. You know, and they're very prolific. They've got big batches of fry, and they'll breed about once a month or once every other month. And they might slow down, you know, a little bit. Go once a month for several months, and then, you know, slow down to once every 2 or 3 months, and then speed back up again. But overall, very easy to breed, real easy to take care of. Just make sure you keep your water clean because they do like to eat a lot. One source actually said they prefer to eat half their body weight every day. So that's why these guys are constantly grazing. You know, fish like, you know, swordtails, guppies, and things, they're not always eating. They do a lot of swimming around. Now, they might have their eyes open, and if they see something, they'll eat it. But these guys are constantly grazing. They've always got their mouth on something, trying to rasp something off of it, because they've just got such big appetites. So you want to make sure you feed them enough. You want to make sure they got wood. You want to make sure the water's clean. Those are, if you have trouble keeping plecos alive, those are your 3 biggest culprits. Make sure your water's clean. That's true with all your fish, but especially with a fish that eats this much and poops this much. You want to keep your water clean. You've got to have wood in the tank. If you don't have wood, you're not going to be able to keep your plecos alive. It's just not going to work because they need that in their digestive system. And the other biggest reason people struggle to keep plecos alive is they just don't feed them enough. They think, oh, it's an algae eater. It just eats the algae off the glass. That's all it needs. No, these guys need food. They need some kind of vegetable. You know, a couple of times a week, throw some cucumber in the tank, and anything they haven't eaten after a day and a half or so, go ahead and pull that out or whatever. But you want to feed these guys. You don't want to just let them fend for themselves. They'll starve. So make sure they're eating enough, and make sure they're pooping. If they're pooping, they're eating. So make sure they eat enough. Make sure they've got wood. Make sure your water's clean. And you're pretty well good to go with bristlenose. They're very easy to take care of, very easy to breed, and they're just an excellent fish. All right, this video is actually a lot longer. I just now looked at the timer. This is a lot longer video than I thought it was, or than I expected it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Oh man, I got to clean this glass. That's nasty. I'm going to go ahead and sign off now, guys. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.